To get the Crime Writers on After Show right now, go to patreon.com/Partners in Crime Media.
I'm Rebecca Lavoie, and this is Crime Writers On. Crime Writers On is the original true crime review podcast that digs into true crime, pop culture, other podcasts. And on this episode, he forced a standoff with the federal government over grazing rights, then gave the world a peek into his followers' radical vision for America. We'll revisit Leah Sottile's prophetic investigation in the 2018 podcast, Bundyville. Joining me to get that done and more is true crime author, TV journalist, and host of These Are Their Stories podcast, my husband, and the love of my life, Kevin Flynn. Hello, Kevin.
Hello, Rebecca.
So, Kevin, what are we going to listen to in today's CWO Classic Rewind?
Okay, well, we have a request from Josh, who is dedicating this one to Toby Ball.
Oh, do your Casey Kasem.
This is a long-distance dedication. Going out to a dog named Snuggles. Well, we're going back to our August 3rd, 2018 review of Season 1 of Bundyville from Longreads, Oregon Public Broadcasting, and host Leah Sottile.
All right, let's take a listen to that. Moving on. The new podcast, Bundyville, takes a close look at the story behind Cliven Bundy and his anti-government movement that transfixed the nation.
There's this sense that the American West is wide open country. Nothing to hear but the wind in the sagebrush. But recently, it started to sound more like this. In 2014, in Bunkerville, Nevada, Cliven Bundy and his family had their cattle rounded up by the federal government over a matter of unpaid grazing fees. To hear them tell it, what they did next was gather a posse and take those cows back, at gunpoint.
Heavily armed, they forced dozens of federal agents to stand down.
They'd really like to be seen as cowboys.
The West has now been won!
Produced by Oregon Public Broadcasting and Longreads, reporter Leah Sottile finds that the Bundy case was more than just a dispute over grazing rights. The seeds of Bundy's discontent were sown by court cases, nuclear testing, Mormon oppression, and a religious prophecy. And while many assume that the Bundy case has concluded, Sottile makes the case that it's only a matter of time before the Bundys' extreme views are responsible for more violence. We will be discussing spoilers from the Bundyville podcast. If you want our spoiler-free review, jump to the time code listed in the show notes. All right, the first thing I really want to talk about here is something that is executed in this podcast so well that is so hard to do.
What's that?
This podcast is almost entirely narration. There is very little tape in the whole in this podcast. There are a couple of episodes where she has a couple of interviews, a couple episodes where she goes places. It is largely a narrated podcast. I want to say like between 80 and 90% of it's narration.
I don't think it's that much, but it is heavy on narration.
That is so hard to do and have it be good and have it be done well. And I really think it speaks to the strength of the writing and the reporter and her delivery of the writing and the pacing and the production that makes this work so well. What do you think, Kevin?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I remember there being, a little more other voices in the piece, but I think that it was very strong. And you've got a reporter here who did not parachute into this story.
No.
She had been following it for, years now. I mean, and, she's able to bring that experience to bear on the story, but also to bring herself to the podcast in a way she does very effectively.
Appropriately,
yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you that it's appropriate. That's another thing that's difficult to do. And it's something that we've criticized a lot in shows when we hear a reporter saying, I found myself wondering why X, so I decided to do Y. It's like, you don't have to say that, but she doesn't have to say that. She says it in such a way where there's a reason why she was wondering it, because she's given us the context that she's been reporting it and the question that comes up over and over again. And you believe her.
Yeah.
Because she's kind of one of the reporters of record in the story. Laura, true confession, when you first told me that we should listen to this podcast, I thought it was about Ted Bundy. Not going to lie. I was very happy to start listening to it and realizing it was about this very interesting story instead. What do you think of this as a topical choice for a long-form podcast in the true crime genre?
Well, that's why I wanted to listen to this, because it was something that wasn't, it's like some unsolved murder case or something like it was. But it was a case that's really kind of fascinating to me anyway, as I was watching this unfold, several years ago on the news, but only really seeing like the news highlights. So this was a great way to really get some context about the background, about what led up to this and this family and what was going on. The way that Leah tells the story, there was a couple times. There was one time where she mentions doing shots with the Mr. T impersonator, and she was hungover, and I was like, why did she include that? But looking back at the whole podcast, really, the way that she delivers the story, where it is mostly her talking, is almost like, if you're a reporter and you're out covering a story and then you sit down with your friends to sort of debrief, it's very conversational and it's very relatable in terms of the way that she tells the story and, disseminates the information as she's going through what she did, what she learned, what they did. Very easy to listen to.
What you're talking about her insertion of herself in those ways, I agree with you that, a couple of times I was just like, well, that was an interesting choice. I found myself thinking that. Yeah. Not bad, just interesting and, sometimes a little bit like unconventional. But there was one moment in the podcast that is one of my favorite moments that we've listened in a podcast we've listened to in recent months. Do you remember when Leah and her producer went to the original Bundyville? And they drive all the way out there in that Jeep, and they get to that little one-room schoolhouse or whatever it was, and there were all those old-timey photos of the old-timey Bundys on the wall, and she's giving all their names.
So there's a photo on the wall, a bunch of military photos, military portraits, and there's Dave Bundy, that's Cliven's dad.
For 3 generations, Cliven's ancestors called this place on top of a mountain home.
Oh, here we go. The 3 mothers of Bundyville. Ella Bundy was Abraham's wife. So that's who settled it.
And then she finds the one photo and she goes,
man, look at her. She looks pissed.
She looks pissed. And it was so perfect because it's her. It's her real reaction. And it's important, but it was a good choice because it makes her so likable and relatable and believable in some ways, Yeah. Toby, I'd love to know what you think. A thing that I never would have known about had I not listened to this podcast was the origin story behind Cliven Bundy's, or the alleged origin story, we should say, behind Cliven Bundy's mistrust of the government, that the government was doing nuclear testing in the town next to where he grew up, and there were these fallout warnings, it's not dangerous, just stay inside during recess, kids, where people got sick and died from radiation poisoning. We know that stuff is true. When I say alleged, I'm not saying that's not true. What I'm saying is we don't really know if that's the source of his mistrust of the government or not. What do you think of the history that's wrapped into Bundyville and the way Leah delivers that?
It's funny because I was thinking about that exact thing when I was watching Dark Tourist about Kazakhstan with all the, fallout babies, basically. Mm-hmm. I think I can be sympathetic to that aspect of things in that there are definitely consequences to the government being pretty blasé out of, I guess, ignorance in their atomic testing and the advice they gave to people. My issue with the whole thing doesn't really stem from that necessarily, but from it basically seems like a family of narcissists who have this sense that they are able to, particularly with the Constitution, interpret the Constitution and what it means as, in their minds, a holy document in ways that nobody else can, and that the courts don't have the authority to weigh in on. Mm-hmm. In the end, it seems like a lot of this stuff is sort of excuses to kind of try to explain why they have these insane beliefs, basically.
Right. Now, Kevin, I think that Leah does an admirable job in this podcast of, she doesn't shy away from the things that are on their face, difficult and true, while still justifying the interestingness of these characters. So it is difficult to say, look at someone that is racist and has a lot of racist followers who say and do racist things, and then say, but they're still interesting and I want to learn about them, when the temptation would be just to be like, screw them, like they're not worth my time. I think she does a good job explaining why we should know them.
Yeah, and it's hard to do in a hyper-politicized world that we're living in right now. It's very easy to dismiss, the people who showed up to protest as being all in the same bucket, and or the same basket, or whatever the
deplorables.
Yeah, whatever that is. It's also very easy to criticize the podcast for saying, "Oh, well, you're critical of that." I mean, it becomes the cyclical thing. However, I think that she does a good job of pointing out that while there are people there that have sort of legitimate political grievances, that a lot of these individuals, I should say a lot of it, but some of these particular individuals are maladjusted for other reasons and have demonstrated that.
Yes.
And that there's a lot of people who went there, itching for a fight that really didn't have a lot to do with grazing rights.
Well, that's what's interesting is that she makes the very compelling and proven case, I think, through this podcast that's the followers are very divorced from because the cause is like a MacGuffin, right?
Right. She doesn't make this case explicitly, but it seems like there's a lot of people who are followers looking for a leader, or at the very least, some direction to go. They're marching in place.
She does make the case explicitly,
Right, and that's where someone like Bundy comes in, where all of a sudden he has a cause, and they're like, "Yep, okay, this is where I'm going, and I'm ready to shoot somebody."
She does make that case explicitly.
But that isn't the most interesting thing about the podcast.
Yeah,
however.
but she says they use the same techniques ISIS uses in recruiting people, saying that using the real religion versus false religion argument, using the calling to disenfranchised losers, basically, people who have failed in their own lives, who love to be armed, who are afraid of an imaginary government plot against them, and they have done a very good job speaking in a language that resonates with that by using this. And this is the most interesting thing to me, because we see this in the political debate over and over again. We are America's farmers and ranchers. And meanwhile, America's farmers and ranchers are like, no, you're not. You are not us. You don't represent us. But they're so good at it.
Yeah.
They're so good at it.
Yeah. I actually really liked how people were trolling by
sending the bag of dicks to the standoff?
Yeah, they're calling them y'all Qaeda.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just thought, it was kind of funny.
Laura, what did you think of the part when Leah, I think in a really good move for the podcast, went to Cliven Bundy's ranch and interviewed him in his own damn living room? What'd you think?
That was awesome. Listening along, they get there, they go to the son's house first, and they're not sure if they're going to make it to see Cliven, if they're going to get in. And then what was great is the way she clearly made note of what was around her while she was out there interviewing. And she described, okay, now we're going down the road. This is where they thought the snipers were. And then we get to the ranch, and she's like, this is it.
So we head inside, and I admit, it feels really surreal to be in this place that was the site of the first standoff. It feels homey. It's this tiny old house. It smells like barbecue sauce or beef jerky. The couch is made of this soft old leather, and there's a blanket with cow print draped over the back. Photos of the family and the Mormon temple are framed in rustic wood. Cliven's wife Carol is working in the kitchen. We sit down on the couch, and Cliven walks inside in a clean plaid shirt. He's just splashed water into his hair and combed it back. And he hefts this huge cardboard sign into the room with him. It says, Nevada land. Welcome and enjoy a free land by the people.
So what's the story of this sign?
That, to me, the description of the places where she was doing these interviews, I think bumped this whole thing up a notch in terms of really bringing you into the scene.
And the 66 grandkids? What do you think of the 66? That seemed like a lot to you?
What the hell? I was like, are you kidding? And then she's like, no, there's 3 more on the way or something. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting that she prefaced it by saying that, after the trial, when they had the mistrial and they're out of jail. The case is over, essentially. Reporters hadn't necessarily followed up to find out what they were doing. So I thought that was very interesting, that she was I think she had said she's one of the first reporters to go out and try to talk to him since all of the court case ended.
That's right.
And that he was willing to talk, maybe more so because his son is now running for governor. So the son wanted to get some, I think she had even mentioned that, maybe that's why he's talking to us, because now he needs some publicity. She had clearly done so much research for her to be able to bring out the religious beliefs and how they were equating the Constitution with religion. And it was just really fascinating.
And they were making up religious stuff to justify their crusade, the false prophecy that even, whatever you think about the leaders of the Mormon Church and their doctrine, which can be unconventional, let's put it that way, when those folks are like, nope, that prophecy is not a thing. And that was a good bit of reporting there. Toby, a big theme in the podcast is white privilege. And Leah lays it out there. She doesn't make any bones about it. She talks about what was happening contemporaneously at Standing Rock. Many of the same issues that the government intervened in that instance with water cannons and trying to, make the protesters uncomfortable, wait them out, give them these torturous, awful conditions, violence against the protesters. And then in these Bundy standoffs, were so reticent to do anything. The Bundy clan was able to go get their cows back with no intervention. The Bundy clan, during that instance where the man was shot at the traffic stop, he was literally repeatedly reaching for a gun and repeatedly got so many warnings in a way that a person of color does not typically get, as we know from these standoff situations. How do you think the podcast did at handling the race aspect and the white privilege aspect of this story?
I think it was good that they're upfront about it. I think it's a complicated dynamic, and white privilege, I think, is the number one thing. Like, I don't know if you had a group of radical African Americans like holed up somewhere, or obviously Native Americans, that they would get the same deference, I guess. It's a funny, like, what lesson would you learn? And part of it is, I think, like Standing Rock, they weren't armed or threatening. They were protesting.
Isn't that the difference instead of deference? I mean, isn't that like the practical difference? Is that one group you have peaceful protesters who may be angry, but then you also have a group that they're all armed to the teeth and have been openly threatening to use violence?
I think it has to do
Doesn't
more.
that change the way you deal with them?
I think it has to do more with how the government looked after these other incidents like this, like Ruby Ridge, like Waco. And these Bundys are just freaking good at beating them in court. They're good at it.
But I think there's two things. One is, the government doesn't want to get into a mass firefight with American citizens. And there is in this sort of right-wing, I would say group, but movement, all these martyrs who were heavily armed and basically gave the finger to the federal government and were then killed. They talk about Randy Weaver's wife and son. And then, of course, there's the Branch Davidians.
Timothy McVeigh, who is apparently a hero to a lot of these folks.
God, it's just ridiculous. So, I think that there's a bunch of factors that go into play. And then the fact that up at Standing Rock, people weren't going to be shooting back. The lesson is the exact opposite of the one that you want, which is you would think that you would want to respect the peaceful protests and crack down on the threatening violence protests.
Yes.
But that's not, in fact, what seems to happen. And race, I think, definitely plays a part in it. But I also think sort of the attitude of the quote-unquote protesters is another one. And it's just a lot easier to deal with people who aren't going to fire back.
I really thought a really effective thing in this podcast was the way Leah deconstructs the myth of the lost version of America that these ranchers say that they're fighting for. And she points out, for instance, that, there is no economic benefit to this business that they are saying that they're losing, that they are actually not, in fact, taking care of these cattle that they're letting them roam on wirelands. Many of them have been born feral. They sort of like don't even keep track of these animals that they are claiming to need these rights for. That their argument is, the federal government isn't allowed to own land. I would pay the state these fees. And I'm like, No, you wouldn't. You have in no way demonstrated that you're willing to pay anyone anything. You don't think anything should be public. You should just be able to use it as you will.
Very conveniently, I don't recognize the authority of things that go against me.
Right.
I'm for America and the Constitution, but I'm not for paying the federal government. I do for the state. And
they don't seem to be mad at like all of the big agribusiness stuff. They're not mad at like Cisco and like factory farms and, all the things that actually are eating away at their ability to make money as a small farmer.
Was that dairy cattle or was it beef cattle or what were they?
It was beef cattle because they were talking about shipping them out, and they were saying like we used to ship out a trailer a day, and now we ship
like those skinny feral cattle like for make
stir fry.
Stir fry.
They didn't even know how many cattle they had, though. That's the part I found really bizarre.
Because it is a straw man argument. It really is. I mean, and I think the other thing she does an amazing job of is very much in the vein of what we're seeing right now in the court system. Like right now, there's a very interesting legal case against crazy-ass Alex Jones, brought by Sandy Hook parents, suing him for defamation because he left for a long time claimed that Sandy Hook was a hoax. Now, they have been subject to violence because of things he has said.
Right.
They have been targeted. They've been threatened. They've had to move like a bunch of times. They're now living in a private, locked, gated community because of what this guy did. And the Bundys, just like Alex Jones, are saying, we are not doing the violence. We're not telling people to do the violence, but they are damn well inciting the violence. And she does a very good job showing us, I think, that is worse in many ways because they are weaponizing, very much like groups like ISIS do. They are weaponizing and harnessing this discontent. It's really, really something. Toby, what do you think of the fact that the Bundys won these court cases real quick? I know that it happened in the news, but when she sort of describes how it went down and what a bad actor the government was in court, withholding evidence, lying about things. What do you think about that?
I had a couple thoughts, one of which is, even though the defendants aren't sympathetic, in my view, the way a lot of other defendants are and other stuff we've looked at, the government's still got to act. It's got to be a fair actor. I mean, it's just bullshit. And especially for this stuff, I mean, this should be easy cases,
right?
Like you shouldn't be messing around with them. And then the second thing is, it seems as though there are two things going on, and one is like an appeal to facts, and the other one is an appeal to a sense of self that the Bundys put forward in these districts where they, even if the people can't personally identify with the lifestyle that the Bundys are sort of, it's not an accurate picture, but they're sort of painting this picture of rural life under assault. If you're laying out a bunch of like sort of facts on one side and the other side is telling an emotionally resonant story, I just think that was a smart strategy on their part, and it obviously worked.
Yeah.
To a certain extent, it's like you would hope that the jurors would be like focused on the facts and what actually happened rather than what seemed to me to be mostly a justification of why we did this. So when you're on a jury, for instance, Rebecca.
Yes.
Yeah, take notes, Rebecca.
Stick to the facts.
Well, I'm also going to hope the state doesn't lie and withhold evidence from the jury.
I think they underestimated them. I really think the state got sloppy because they underestimated. They see like, oh, here's these ranchers, like not realizing pro se ranchers were smarter than they thought they were. I mean, I think that they underestimated the ability of these people. And I think that goes to what you were talking about before with the family sort of serving as this lightning rod for all the other discontented people to rally around, whether they are rallying for the same cause or another anti-government cause. I think they were underestimated, and I think they still are, because you're looking at, where this is going next, and it seems like there's a whole other family that could be the next place that something like this happens.
And they might be very disconnected from the outcome of the cause that they attract, as Leah points out, because they have a gripe, and they may end up in a situation that's completely disconnected to what it is they're trying to do, which the husband feels some reticence about, right?
Yeah, exactly. This was the people, they had their land, and there was something going on with was it that they were diverting the water?
That's right.
So everything dried up out at their, was it Patch of Heaven?
Yep. Yep.
And so they couldn't do what they set out there to do, and so they're fighting over this water. But this again, it serves as sort of this. It kind of activates everybody else that may or may not be feeling this is the cause that they're upset about, but it's just another thing that they can find where the government is doing something that they shouldn't be doing.
Yeah.
And to serve to draw all these people in there. So that's going to be interesting. I think that was a really interesting way to end this.
Yeah, I think so too.
And somebody was just pardoned. One of the other cases that was referenced in this within the last couple of weeks, right?
Yep. He was pardoned by the president, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and we also have a New Hampshire resident who's currently incarcerated for this.
Seeking a pardon, yeah.
So, Kevin, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
You were a reporter for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
I know that you did a lot of different kinds of reporting. You found yourself in all kinds of situations.
Mm-hmm.
What would you do if you were interviewing somebody and they sat across from you and stared in your eyes and sang the state of Nevada anthem while staring at you and not blinking?
There is a land that I love the best, fairer than all I can see. Right in the heart of the Golden West, home means Nevada to me.
What would you do?
I would leave my wife for him.
All right. Well, I think it's time to do what we like to do on this show. Let's give the podcast Bundyville our Crime Writers On endorsement or not. Give us a thumbs up or thumbs down review of the podcast Bundyville. And briefly, and without spoilers, let us know whether you think our listeners should check it out. Laura Bricker, what do you think of Bundyville?
I liked it. I thought it was very interesting. I loved the way she told the story. You know, she did humanize these people in a way, regardless if you agree or disagree with where they're coming from, in such a way that you really understood more of the background. And it was pretty fascinating. So I would say listen to it.
What about you, Toby Ball? Thumbs up or thumbs down for Bundyville from OPB and Longreads?
I really liked it. Thumbs up.
Yeah, I'm going to give it a big thumbs up, too. I really like Bundyville a lot. I listened to the whole thing in one day. I binged it. Reminiscent to me in terms of style of 30 for 30's Bikram, in terms of the writing style and storytelling style and narration style. I learned a lot about something I thought I knew about. It turns out I didn't know much at all, and it wasn't Ted Bundy. It was the other Bundys. But it was a fascinating look at history, context, legal stuff, politics, really great framework through which to tell a very relevant American story. Kevin, what do you think? Thumbs up, thumbs down for Bundyville?
Yeah, I'm a thumbs up. It's, more news analysis than it is true crime, but it's still a very compelling look at a story that captured the nation's attention, and that does have, the possibility of resonating long into the future. The reporting is solid, and, the reporter brings an awful lot to the case, and we end up in the end getting a pretty good portrait of Cliven Bundy and his family and why they are so angry.
So, Kevin, this is one of my favorite podcasts of all time, right?
Yeah.
It really, over time, has really stood the test of time. It looks at the Bundys as people, tells their full story, including their really complicated path into extremism. It didn't start the way it starts with other people, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And this very American battle over land use. Anyway, I find it super interesting. Obviously, it's a great podcast.
Yeah, the thing that I recall is that there was a passage in the podcast in which Leah talks to somebody who makes reference to what will happen if President Trump isn't reelected.
Right.
And sort of the menace of that, which to me seemed a little prescient and, really sort of turned me on to that idea for the very first time. And, of course, we saw what happened, just a few years later.
Yeah. I think also she takes a good look at, what the movement is all about, what its roots are. They're not the same for everyone. And really, it feels like a very timely show in every way.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, this show was recorded in Studio C, the closet in our New Hampshire basement, where we also have barricaded ourselves until all of our demands have been met. On behalf of all the crime writers, thanks so much for listening. We will catch you later.
Partners in Crime Media.